The Roman economy. Rise, power, and collapse. The Roman economy was one of the most powerful and complex economic systems of the ancient world. It supported an empire that stretched from the cold frontiers of Britain to the deserts of Egypt, and from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the rich lands of the Middle East. Rome did not rely only on military strength. Its real power came from an economic structure that absorbed land, labor, resources, and wealth from conquered territories and redistributed them through trade, taxation, and state control. Roads, ports, slavery, agriculture, and currency formed the backbone of this system. For centuries, this economic engine sustained Roman dominance, yet within the same system lay deep weaknesses that would later contribute to collapse. Understanding the Roman economy matters because it shows how growth, inequality, debt, and state power interact over time. Rome's story is not only ancient history, it reflects patterns that still appear in modern economies. The agricultural roots of Rome. Early Rome was built on agriculture. Land ownership defined wealth, social status, and political influence. Most Roman citizens were small farmers who worked their own fields and produced grain, olives, and wine. Economic life was local and simple. Farming was seen as a moral duty, and independence came from owning land. This balance changed as Rome expanded beyond Italy. Military conquest transformed the economy. Each successful campaign brought new farmland, tribute, and enslaved people. Defeated regions were required to send grain, silver, and taxes to Rome. War became profitable. Expansion paid for the army, and the army made further expansion possible. Over time, Rome shifted from a self-sustaining agricultural society to an empire dependent on external resources. The city of Rome itself grew rapidly, far beyond what nearby farmland could support. The rise of latifundia, as wealth from conquest flowed in, Rome's elite began buying or seizing large areas of land. Small farms disappeared, replaced by massive estates known as latifundii. These estates focused on cash crops like olives and wine rather than food for local consumption. Their success depended heavily on slave labor. Slaves, captured during wars, worked the fields at extremely low cost. Small farmers could not compete with this system. Many lost their land and moved to cities in search of work. Rome's population swelled, but its economic base became increasingly fragile. To prevent unrest among the urban poor, the state introduced grain distributions, known as the citizens received free or subsidized grain imported from provinces such as Egypt and North Africa. While this policy maintained social stability, it increased Rome's dependence on long-distance supply chains and state spending. Slavery as an economic system. Slavery was central to the Roman economy. It was not limited to households. Enslaved people worked in agriculture, mines, construction projects, workshops, and transportation. Mines in Spain and the Balkans produced silver and gold under brutal conditions, supplying the empire with precious metals. This reliance on slave labor created efficiency in the short term, but discouraged innovation. With labor so cheap, there was little incentive to develop new technology or improve productivity. Economic growth depended more on conquest than on progress. When Rome's expansion slowed, the supply of new slaves declined. Labor costs rose, productivity fell, and the weaknesses of the system became visible. The economy that once thrived on constant expansion began to strain under its own structure. Roads, ports, and trade networks. One of Rome's greatest economic strengths was its vast trade network. The empire invested heavily in infrastructure, stone-paved roads, connected cities, military camps, and ports. These roads were built first for the army, but merchants quickly used them for commerce. By the height of the empire, Rome controlled more than 400,000 kilometers of roads, allowing goods to move faster and more reliably than in any previous civilization. Sea trade was even more important. The Mediterranean became Rome's internal highway, often called Mare Nostrum, meaning our sea. Large merchant ships carried grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, and luxury goods from the east. Ports such as Ostia, Alexandria, Carthage, and Antioch became economic hubs where goods, people, and money flowed constantly. Trade connected distant provinces to the Roman center, but it also created dependency. Many regions were forced to specialize in certain products, leaving them vulnerable to disruption if trade routes failed. Money and the Roman currency system. To manage this massive economy, Rome relied on a standardized currency system. Coins were minted in gold, silver, and bronze. The gold aureus and silver denarius were widely accepted across the empire. This common currency simplified trade, tax collection, and military payments. At first, Roman coins maintained stable metal content. Trust in money was high. Soldiers, merchants, and officials all relied on these coins for daily transactions. However, as state expenses increased, especially for the army and bureaucracy, pressure grew on the treasury. Later emperors began reducing the silver content of coins while keeping the same face value. This process, known as debasement, allowed the state to create more money quickly. In the short term, it solved budget problems. In the long term, it weakened confidence in currency and contributed to inflation. Taxation and provincial exploitation taxes were the lifeblood of the Roman state. Provinces paid land taxes, poll taxes, and customs duties. In many regions, tax collection was outsourced to private contractors called. These collectors often abused their power, extracting more than required and enriching themselves. Rome justified heavy taxation by promising protection, roads, and order. In reality, much of the wealth flowed toward the capital and the elite. Provinces supplied grain, metals, and money, while Rome consumed. This imbalance created resentment. While some provincial elites benefited by cooperating with Roman rule, many communities suffered under constant extraction. Economic loyalty to Rome depended largely on continued stability and military strength. The cost of empire maintaining the empire was extremely expensive. The Roman army alone consumed a massive portion of the state budget. Soldiers expected regular pay, land grants, and pensions after service. Fortifications, weapons, and logistics required continuous funding. As borders expanded, defense costs rose. New threats required more troops. When conquest slowed, new sources of wealth dried up, but expenses did not decrease. The empire began spending more to protect what it already owned, rather than gaining new resources. This shift marked a critical turning point. Rome's economy had been designed for expansion. Once growth stopped, the system struggled to sustain itself. Debt, inflation, and the end of an empire. By the 3rd century, the Roman economy was no longer expanding. Conquest had slowed, yet the costs of empire kept rising. Defending long borders, paying soldiers, maintaining cities, and managing internal conflicts consumed enormous resources. Without new lands to exploit, Rome began funding itself through debt and currency manipulation. The state debased its coins repeatedly. Silver content fell year after year, but the face value remained the same. At first, people accepted the coins. Over time, trust collapsed. Prices rose sharply. Soldiers demanded higher wages. Merchants adjusted prices daily. Inflation became permanent. Money itself began to fail. In many regions, people refused coins and demanded payment in grain, oil, or labor instead. Barter returned, especially in rural areas. Taxes were increasingly collected in goods. This marked a critical shift. Rome was moving away from a money-based economy. As trade declined, cities suffered. Roman urban life depended on surplus flowing in from the countryside and provinces. When agriculture weakened and trade routes broke down, cities lost their purpose. Public works deteriorated. Roads cracked. Aqueducts collapsed. Baths closed. Grain distributions became unreliable. The middle class disappeared first. Artisans, traders, and shopkeepers were crushed by high taxes and low demand. Many abandoned cities entirely, seeking protection on large estates. Urban populations shrank slowly but steadily. Rome itself survived longer than most, but even it declined dramatically. Meanwhile, inequality deepened, wealth concentrated in the hands of powerful landowners. These elites controlled vast estates and private armed guards. As the central government weakened, local authority replaced imperial power. Loyalty shifted from the state to landowners. Formerly, free farmers became colony tenant workers tied to the land. They were not slaves, but they could not leave. In exchange for protection and food, they gave labor and loyalty. This system reduced mobility and froze economic life. Wealth stopped circulating. Markets faded. Local self-sufficiency replaced trade. The Roman economy had transformed. What was once a dynamic, interconnected imperial market became a collection of isolated estates. The state could no longer collect taxes efficiently or enforce laws consistently. Infrastructure collapsed. Military strength declined. Rome did not fall in a single moment. Its economy unraveled over centuries. Inflation, debt, inequality, and over-militarization weakened the system from within. Political instability accelerated the process, but economic decay laid the foundation. The lesson of Rome is clear. Economic systems built on constant expansion eventually hit limits. When growth slows, but costs rise. States turn to debt and currency manipulation. When trust in money disappears, markets collapse. When inequality hardens, social stability breaks. Rome ruled the ancient world for hundreds of years. Its economy made that dominance possible. And when that economy failed, the empire followed quietly, gradually, and permanently.